In the last chapter, we talked about decision making, where we use either else if statements or case statements to decide on which set of statements to run based on some comparison. In this chapter, we're going to look at a little bit different control structure called a loop or repetition. And with loops, we look at a comparison and then execute a set of statements some number of times based on the comparison. Sometimes that can be a controlled number, or sometimes it can be based on some other value that either the user enters or that is read from the computer, such as when you reach the end of a file. Let's begin by looking at the general form of a while loop. We begin with the keyword while, followed by some type of comparison, again, usually a relational expression. If the comparison is true, then we execute a set of statements, and then after the statements are finished, we go back and look at the comparison again. So somewhere in the statements that are being executed should be some statement that will modify the comparison so that it will eventually become false. Otherwise, the loop would run forever in what we call an infinite loop. So let's take a look at one example, a very simple example of a while loop. The parentheses around the comparison, just like with if statements, are optional. I put them there just to highlight the comparison, but normally with Ruby we leave them out. So let me take them out. So we're saying while the value of count is less than or equal to 5, write out hello world to the screen. The one thing we're missing from this would be the statement that modifies the loop. So we need to have count plus equal 1 so that count goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and eventually to 6, with 6 being what stops the loop. So let's go ahead and run this code. We'll come back and look at it again. So you see we get hello world written to the screen 5 times. And one more time, just to reiterate how the loop works. We have a variable, we set it to a value, an initial value. We'll call that the loop control variable. So our loop control variable is count. Then in our comparison, we say while count is less than or equal to 5. So while that comparison is true, then we execute the statements inside the loop, which are the first one being write out hello world to the screen, the second one being increment count by 1. Doing that will change the value of count from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and eventually to 6. When count gets to 6, then the loop stops. Let's look at one more example. This time we want to compute and display the sum of the first 10 integers. So we're going to have one variable to represent the sum. We'll initialize it to 0. Then we have another variable that will be our loop control variable that will represent the numbers 1 through 10. So we'll assign it the value 1 to start with. So our while comparison is while number is less than or equal to 10. While that is true, we want to take the current value of number and add it to the sum. So we write sum plus equal number. Then we also need to increment number so that it will eventually become greater than 10. And then that's all we need for the loop, so we can end it right here. And then we want to write out the sum. And we'll do it very simply by just displaying the sum. So let's save the program, run it, and we see that the sum is 55, and that's correct. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10 is indeed 55. Let's go over how that loop worked one more time. We initialize our variable to store the sum to 0. We initialize our loop control variable number to 1. Then we write in our comparison while the value of number is less than or equal to 10. And then inside the loop, we add number to sum. And then we increment number by 1. And then we end the program by displaying the sum. So that is how our first loop type, the while loop, works. And with that, we're ready to wrap up this lesson and move to the next lesson where we're going to look at a similar loop that would use just a little bit different logic. and that's called the until loop.